Right. Assalamualaikum and good afternoon. We meet again now for the second session. Uh, Continuation from yesterday, lah. But for today, instead of continue with topic number one, so I'm gonna skip the rest of topic number one. So I hope you can do your own reading for topic number one. So topic number one too is just some basic theory and uh, continuation from what we've discussed yesterday. Okay, so for today, kita go to the second topic, which I think is quite important to build up, the fundamental understanding, especially when we want to move on to topic number three for our next seminar. Okay, so for today, I will try to finish all three sections under topic number two. Whereby all three is actually related with the key financial statements that we can see and we can find dalam annual reports. Okay, so the first two, we have balance sheet and income statement. And these two important documents usually will be our main reference when we do our analysis. We have to rely on the balance sheet and income statement. And in fact, when we want to try to explore 2.3 cash flow statement, we still have to rely on information from the balance sheet and also income statement. So for the next 2 hours, so I'm gonna split into two sections. So for the first section, for the first 1 hour at least, we're gonna explore the balance sheet and income statement. And then for the final 1 hour, we're going to try to prepare. So for cash flow statement, we have to prepare ourselves the actual statement, right? So let's begin. Okay, so as I mentioned, financial statement represent raw material and source of documents for our financial analysis. Okay, and the three key financial statements, including number one, the balance sheet. Okay, which mostly known as statement of financial position. Okay, so this is the current terms. If you refer to the annual reports, most of the company now use statement of financial position, referring to the balance sheet. Okay, so under the balance sheet, it will provide us the snapshot of the company, whereby we can look at their assets, okay, the liabilities, and also the equity. The equity lah. Okay, so we're going to discuss in detail later on. The second document is the income statement, or also known as the profit and loss account. So profit and loss ni usually we simplify it as P&L, but from again, if you look at annual report nowadays, companies are using the income statement as the main title for the report lah. Okay, so in the income statements, we're going to see the changes and the movements in terms of the profit, okay, whereby we take into consideration the revenues and also all the expenses. So revenues ni represent all the inflows, duit masuk, and the expenses represent all the outflows. Okay, so the difference between the two, if the revenues is higher than the expenses, then we're going to get profit lah. Okay, tapi kalau the other way around, if the inflows is less than the outflows, then there's a possibility that the company might suffer loss. Okay, and the third statement is called the cash flow statement. Similar like income statement, cuma the focus is more on the cash movement. Okay, kalau income statement more on the profit. Okay, for cash flow, that's more on the cash movement. So out of three, Okay, out of three that I've mentioned just now, statement of financial position, income statement, and also the cash flow statement. Okay, the first two tu kita akan hanya explore the structure, the format, and the items. Okay, you don't have to worry about how to prepare the statements. Okay, but the ones that we're gonna explore later on is the cash flow statements, how to prepare the cash flow statements. Okay, so let's start with the balance sheet. Okay, by the way, before I terlupa, don't forget to sign in your attendance whenever you have the opportunity. Okay, and the deadline untuk submitting your attendance latest by 6:30 today lah. Okay, so if you masih ingat ni, please do atau please submit your attendance lah. Okay, so for the balance sheet so the balance sheet will show the financial positions, hence the name tadi statement of financial position, usually the final day of the calendar year. Okay, tapi when we talk about calendar ataupun fiscal year ni, usually we are actually referring to the financial year end. Okay, financial year end of the company lah. Right, so every company might have different financial year end. Some might be the 31st of December. Some might use 30th of September. Okay, there are some company might use June, 30th of June, or even there might be some company use March, the final day of March as their financial year end. But regardless of their financial year end, the total transactions that being recorded must be equivalent to one whole year. Okay, one whole year. Okay, regardless habis dia bila, tapi selalunya dia akan starts dengan the first day of the following year lah. So contohnya untuk yang financial year end 31st December, so dia akan start dengan 1st Jan. Okay, 1st Jan. So sama jugalah. Kalau dia end 30th of September, so usually the report akan start dengan 1st of October. Okay, 1st of October. So and then the rest sama jugalah. Okay. So in the balance sheet, it will summarize all the firm's resources, okay, in terms of the assets, as I mentioned before, and it will be balanced against the liabilities, the debt, and also the equity, which represent the ownership. Okay, so we're going to see the equation later on, the accounting equation that shows the relationship between the assets and how it will be balanced against the liabilities and also the equity. Okay, like this. Okay, so the assets here represent the things that we have. Okay, assets that we possessed. Okay, and it will be balanced, and we want to find out how these assets will be financed by. Okay, so for example, if our assets valued at, let's say, 100 million. Okay, katakanlah the total value of assets is 100 million. We want to know, and we should get to know how these assets will be funded by. Okay, so katakanlah the total liabilities is valued at 25 million. Okay, the liabilities is 25 million, and we know for sure the owner's equity, the contribution from the owners will be the balance, which is 75 million. Okay, 75 million. So what does it mean here? Okay, in terms of the snapshot, what we can gain from these numbers. Okay, so we can translate this into ratios, okay, into percentage. So here, from the total of 100 million, we can say that 25% of the assets is financed by debt, because liabilities ni adalah hutang, debt. Okay, and for the owner's equity adalah contribution from the owner. So 75% of it, of the 100 million worth of assets, are financed by the owner. Okay, so by looking just at this is what we call as the capital structure. We can say that this company does not rely on debt to purchase their assets or to acquire their assets. So majority of the assets are purchased or funded by the owner's equity. Okay, so maknanya kebergantungan dia on the debt is very minimum lah. 25% is not that high. It is considered healthy ratio because it's less than 1/3. So dia kurang 1/3 from the value of the assets. Okay, so if the value of the liabilities or debt is not more than 1/3, okay, 1/3 ni kalau you convert into percentage is about 33.3% kan. So since the ratio is less than this value, so it shows that the company is healthy, the level of debt is reasonable, is under control, okay, and yeah, it's very strong and healthy position for the company. So that's what we can explain just looking at these broad numbers. Kita tak tengok lagi the details. If we look at the details, then we can track each and every single position that they have lah dari segi profitability dia. Kita tak tengok lagi. Kita tak tengok in terms of the efficiency. We tak tengok in terms of the liquidity yet. Okay, but looking at this, just we can see just on the snapshot sahaja. Okay, so next we're going to see how the format looks like. Okay, so dari segi format, this is the traditional format of the balance sheet, whereby it using the T account style. Okay, T account macam bentuk T ni kan, T shape, whereby assets on the left hand side and then liabilities and equities on the right hand side. Okay, and they categorize it into a few sections. So for example, for assets, dia pecahkan kepada current assets and also the fixed assets. Okay, so let's go through the items under each category. So for current assets, mostly they're going to start with the most liquid assets on top. Okay, so untuk liquid sebenarnya sebelum marketable securities, usually we're going to start with cash. So sepatutnya cash yang paling liquid sekali. So it's going to start with cash on top. Okay, so this cash can be cash in their hands, in the company's hand. So can be in the cash vault, for example, ataupun cash can be cash in the bank. Okay, so regardless, both kita akan letak dia dalam the cash category ataupun the cash account. Okay, and then we have marketable securities. Okay, marketable securities is a form of investment ataupun niche. Kita letak dia sebagai short term investment. Okay, whereby company sometimes doesn't want to put a lot of their reserve in cash. Okay, so therefore they can opt for marketable securities, whereby they can put their money short-term basis in any types of investment that can offer them a significant amount of return. Okay, instead of they put everything in cash. Okay, so maknanya if they need the money, it's very liquid, but at the same time, if they don't use the money, they can generate return instead of put it in cash. Okay, so that's marketable securities. And then we have account receivable. Okay, so account receivable is a types of asset whereby it's associated with credit sales. Okay, credit sales, so meaning companies who do sales on credit basis. Okay, so they buat sales lah, they jual the products to the client, to the customers, but they allow the customer to pay on credit basis. So pay on credit means dibenarkan bayar on deferred basis lah, maknanya bayar secara tangguh. Okay, let's say they give credit 3 months, 6 months. So amount of sales to happen, okay, but instead of receiving cash, we're going to put it in the account receivable. Okay, and this account receivable usually will be received within 1 year period. Okay, within 1 year. So for current assets, everything here must be received and must or can be converted into cash within 1 year. Okay, so that's the characteristic of current assets. Next, we have inventories. So inventories ni simply means the stock of the company. Okay, stock of the products. Okay, if the company involved in productions, in manufacturing, so inventories ni can be in the form of raw materials, can be in the form of semi-finished goods, or even the actual finished goods that they want to sell to the client. Okay, but for those yang tak involved dengan manufacturing ataupun productions, for example trading companies, they might purchase the finished goods directly from the supplier ataupun from the distributor. Okay, so barang yang dia beli from distributor and then dia letak dekat dia punya warehouse sebelum dia jual, that is their inventories. Okay, their stocks. Okay, so inventories tu pun part of the current assets as well. And finally, we have prepaid expenses. Okay, the prepaid expenses are the types of expenses that you do and you pay in advance. Okay, you pay in advance. So contoh yang paling senang sebenarnya, I will give you, if you have a rental, okay, as a rental, imagine you as a business have an office, and the office you tak beli, you just rent from the landlord, and you have to pay rental lah bila you buat sewa kan. So you have to pay the rental, and usually the rental is on monthly basis. Okay, on monthly basis. But in this case, the monthly expenses too, you pay it upfront. You bayar in advance. So when you paid rental in advance, okay, rental paid in advance, dia akan masuk dalam prepaid expenses. Okay, so contohnya lah, now is in April kan. So instead of you bayar setiap bulan for the year 2025 ni, the company already paid for the whole year untuk setahun, walaupun sekarang baru bulan April. So the final 8 months tu akan masuk dalam prepaid expenses. Okay, akan masuk dalam asset. Okay, so that's number one. The first category under the asset, the current asset, which, as I mentioned, the assets that can be converted into cash within 1 year. So the second category is fixed assets. Okay, so fixed asset, dia punya timeline, it is something that can be converted ataupun you need to acquire the assets more than 1 year. Okay, more than 1 year. So here, as you can see, there's a few example lah diletak kat sini. Plant and machinery, land and buildings, or you can add on lagi motor vehicles. Okay, so all these are part of the fixed assets. Okay, part of the fixed asset. And sometimes people might use the terms non-fixed, non-current, sorry. Okay, selain daripada fixed asset, they might use the term non-current assets. Okay, selain daripada fixed asset, sometimes they have intangible asset juga. Okay, asset that we cannot see but is valuable. Benda yang kita tak boleh nampak tapi valuable. Items like copyright. Copyrights can be licenses, can be trademarks, TM and trademarks. So all of these is part of intangible. So intangible pun masuk dalam non-current assets as well. Okay, so that's one side, the assets. So imagine if we combine every items on the left hand side, we're going to get the total value, let's say, of 100 million tadi. Okay, so it will be balanced out on the right hand side with the same value, 100 million. Cuma in terms of the distribution, again, for liabilities pun sama, we're going to start with the current liabilities, and it shared the similar features, whereby the time frame must be less than 1 year. So apa definition time frame ni? Kalau tadi current asset less than 1 year ni represent the times taken for them to convert the assets into cash within 1 year. For liabilities pula, 1 year ni represents the due, the payables, okay, the outstanding must be paid within 1 year. Okay, so all of the liabilities adalah hutang. So this debt must be paid within 1 year. Okay, so first we have accounts payable. Okay, so account payable ni is the opposite of account receivable. So kalau account receivable is the amount owed by our customer to us as a company. Okay, for account payable pula, it is basically the company's debt, liabilities to the supplier. So now company yang berhutang dengan supplier from third party, and they have to pay within 1 year. Okay, they purchase X amount of values of products, and the supplier give the company let's say 3 months to pay. So the amount yang belum bayar tu akan masuk dalam account payable. Okay, so next we have notes payable. Notes payable ni is actually short term loans. Okay, short term loans. Okay, notes payable ni in short adalah short term loans. So imagine the company requires funding and then go to the bank and ask for working capital loans, and they have to pay within 6 months. Okay, so that short-term loans akan masuk dalam notes payable. Notes payable, and finally accruals. So accruals ni is in full is called accrued expenses. So for current asset, we have prepaid expenses. For liabilities, we have accrued expenses. And how it works is totally the opposite of the prepaid expenses lah. Kalau prepaid expenses tadi, I give the example of rental. Here, I can also use rental as an example. Cuma kalau prepaid expenses, we paid the rental in advance, prepaid, but for accrual, the rental is outstanding. Okay, so the difference to make it easier to see, maybe prepaid expenses ni macam you pay first and then you use later. Macam you bayar prepaid lah, kalau phone tu kan you bayar prepaid, you top up dulu prepaid you and then you use it for later. Tapi kalau accrued ni macam bill. Okay, you use it now, you pay later. Cuma kalau accrued ni pay later tu sometimes later than sepatutnya lah. Sepatutnya bayar within 1 month, tapi you tak bayar for 2 months, for example. Then
it can be expenses also kan?
Yep. It can be anything yang related dengan expenses. Okay, it can be tax, it can be rental, anything lah yang dia dah ambil tapi dia tak bayar lagi. Okay, bills pun boleh, macam saya cakap lah, utility bills, salaries, kalau dia tak bayar gaji pekerja dia few months, then itu semua masuk dalam accrued expenses lah. Okay, so that's the first part of liabilities, but actually we have another one, number 2 kat sini sepatutnya adalah long-term liabilities. Okay, we have short-term ataupun current liabilities. We also have long-term liabilities. Okay, and these long-term liabilities, nature dia payable more than 1 year. Okay, the due tu is beyond 1 year. Okay, so similar like asset tadi, dia ada non-current assets. We also can call this as non-current liabilities juga. Okay, and here we have long-term debt as one of the terms that usually they use. Cuma long-term debt ni agak broad. Okay, this is a generic term. So selain daripada long-term debt, sometimes they can use the terminology as term loans. Okay, kalau tadi ada short-term loans kan untuk notes payable, tapi kalau loans tu perlu dibayar beyond 1 year, kita panggil dia term loans ataupun bank loans. Can be in the form of bonds, right? Debentures. Bonds dengan debentures ni lebih kurang lah similar but yet different because of the nature of the transaction tu berbeza. Kalau bond ni selalunya it comes with collateral, tapi debentures ni without collateral. Then play bonds, debentures, mortgages. Okay, mortgage boleh masuk kat dalam tu. Hire purchase kalau ada pun boleh masuk dalam long term. So because all this due dia beyond 1 year. Okay, mortgage mungkin ambil 10 tahun, 15 tahun. Hire purchase maybe 5 years. Okay, so all beyond 1 year kita akan letak dalam long term liabilities lah. Okay, so when you combine these two, okay, current liabilities plus long term liabilities, then you're gonna get total liabilities. Okay, total liabilities. So total liabilities is just one part of this side. Okay, total liability itu hanyalah a fraction of the asset. So kalau asset ni 100 million, we know total liabilities will not equals to 100 million. Okay, because there's some element of equity akan ada lah. Okay, there will be equity in our account. Okay, so what are the items under equity? Kita ada common stocks, kita ada preferred stocks, and we have retained earnings. So what does it mean? Common stock ni usually represent ownership lah. So if the company is trading in the Bursa Malaysia, for example, and then they sell their stocks or shares in the market, so whoever owns the stocks, own the shares, are the owners of the company, and the owner of the company are entitled for the profit ataupun for the dividend from the profits earned for the year. Okay, and the dividend tu depends on the performance. So the better the performance, and also rely on the dividend policy of the company, so there's a chance untuk company tu ataupun the shareholders to get higher returns in terms of dividend. Okay, tapi untuk preferred stockholder ni pula, they are not particularly the owner of the company, they just invest in the company, but with the intention to get dividend. Cuma dividend untuk preferred stocks will be fixed. Okay, dia tak bergantung kepada performance of the company. Okay, for common stockholders, the higher the returns, the higher the chance for you to get higher profit ataupun higher dividend. But for the preferred stockholders, regardless of the performance, you're gonna get the same amount of dividend. Okay, so that's preferred stockholder. Okay, and then the other common equity should be in the form of retained earnings. So retained earning ni, in short, mungkin nak senang explain, this is like a reserve. Okay, reserve ataupun sometimes we call them the undistributed profit. Okay, undistributed profit. So what does it mean? When the company generate profit, okay, generate profit for the year, so what they can do with the money, with the profit, usually they're gonna pay dividend. Okay, dividend kepada siapa? Kepada common stock dengan preferred stockholders. Okay, you're gonna pay dividend. So let's say lah profit dia 10 million. Okay, profit untuk tahun tu 10 million ringgit. So based on the company's policy, you're gonna pay 4 million worth of dividend. Okay, 4 million daripada 10 million ni dia akan bayar kepada common stockholders and also preferred stockholders in the form of dividend. So what happened to the balance? The balance 6 million lagi ni. So this 6 million will be redistribute back to the return earning, ataupun dia akan masukkan balik, reinvest in the company. Okay, in the form of reserve lah ataupun retained earnings tadi. Okay, so this 6 million lah dia akan masuk kat dalam ni. And this retained earning akan accumulate every single year. Okay, the more the profits they get, okay, so the more their reserves. Okay, so when they're gonna use this retained earning? So maybe in the future, bila company nak expand, then they need capital, then they can use the money. Ataupun, let's say the following year, instead of profit, dia rugi, dia loss. Okay, so they can use this retained earning to make payments of dividend kalau dia nak. Okay, kalau dia nak lah, sebab dividend tu is not compulsory. Okay, they can decide untuk declare dividend ataupun tidak. Right, but if they want to pay dividend to their shareholders, tapi dia rugi, then they can use retained earning lah to make payments. Okay, so and one more maybe I can add on, untuk common equity kita ada paid-in capital. Paid-in capital adalah the amount of capital when they started their business. That's the amount they put in as part of their operation lah. So nak buka business, dia letak 10 million as the paid-in capital, and then dia akan grow the company from there. Okay, so when they combine both equity and liabilities, the value should be equals between the two sides. Okay, but again, I nak remind again, untuk finance balance sheet ni kita tak payah prepare. Okay, usually it will be our source of information, our source of data. So this data you can get either kalau dalam soalan kita boleh dapat daripada the question from the past years, or for your project later on, we're gonna look and kita akan download actually the report directly from the annual reports of the company. Okay, and that will be your source of information. So you tak perlu risaulah macam mana nak buat, cuma kena understand how the items and also the format. Cuma format dia bukan bentuk macam ni. The format will look something like this. Okay, bila you download annual reports of a company, they're going to use this statement of financial position and then obviously the name of the company on top, and instead of a T account, dia punya pecahan ataupun dia punya distribution will be something like this. They're more on a vertical format. So assets on top, then they're going to have liabilities kat sini, and then they have equity here. Okay, so more also vertical format instead of horizontal. Kalau ni tadi horizontal kan, like asset liability side by side. Here asset and liability equity above and below. And on top of that, the data and information they give, dia akan letak dua set of data. Satu is based on group, and satu lagi based on company. So since this is a bank, so dia letak bank lah. Okay, but mostly if it's a normal company, dia akan letak sini group and company. Okay, group and company. So which data to use when you want to do your analysis? I would suggest you to use group. Okay, guna data group. Sebab data group usually will be more complete. Okay, lebih detail, lebih complete, and it's easier to have a standardized numbers lah between all the members. So semua orang akan guna data ataupun source of data yang sama based on group. Okay, for standardization punya purpose. And apa lagi information that we can get? You perasan ada perkataan note kat sini. So note here are referring to the note to the financial statement. Okay, so if you want to know the details of each of items kat dalam ni, you can refer to the notes. For example, I want to know, sebab this is a bank so from the deposits of customers, note number 19. So I want to know deposit ni datang daripada mana, ataupun what kind of contracts they use. But when they talk about this is a bank specifically it is a Islamic banks. So dalam Islamic bank, deposit ni ada datang dalam banyak contract. Mungkin contract wadiah, mungkin contract tawaruk, mungkin mudarabah. Cuma sekarang mudarabah tak masuk dalam deposit lah. Mudarabah dah masuk dalam investment, not deposit anymore. Okay, but yeah, so the details you boleh tengok kat dalam the note. So any items kat sini, if you want to see the details, you can refer to the notes. Okay, so that's the first item, which is the balance sheet, and dekat belakang ni adalah all the things that I've already mentioned to you. Okay, for example, when the assets dia pecah kepada dua, the first category is the current assets. The key point adalah the items can be converted into cash within 1 year. Okay, and atas ni adalah all the relevant examples. And then we have the non-current assets. The key adalah it is acquired for long-term use and usually beyond. Dia tak boleh kasi. Okay, beyond, usually beyond 1 year lah. Okay, beyond 1 year period. Right, and how they express the numbers, usually the fixed asset will be stated as a gross value ataupun as a book value. Okay, harga kasar adalah gross value. And when they state in the net value, it is actually based on gross minus accumulated depreciation. Okay, based on the accumulated depreciation. And as I mentioned tadi, there are some have the intangible assets in the form of patents, goodwill, trademark, and so on. Okay, and for liability sama. For current liabilities, this is obligations that are due within 1 year or less. Ini contoh-contoh dia. And for long-term liabilities, due beyond 1 year. And these are the contoh-contoh sama macam I tulis tadi. And finally, we have the equity. So equity, based on the 4 examples earlier lah, preferred, common, retained earnings, and paid capital. Okay, and I explained one by one earlier. So that's our first statement, the balance sheet ataupun the statement of financial position. Okay, ada soalan ke? Kalau tak ada, we move on to the second statement. Okay, this is lagi straightforward, the income statement. Okay, whereby the income statement will summarize the inflows and the outflows with the same period. Okay, sama juga tempoh 1 tahun. And I'm gonna go straight to the items untuk income statement. So these are the typical items yang ada dalam income statement. Usually they're gonna start with the revenues, the inflows, regardless sama ada revenue itu datang dalam bentuk cash ataupun credit sales. They're gonna record everything. And the first level of expenses, okay, sebab bila dalam income statement ni kita concern on the inflows and outflows. So the inflows memang kebanyakannya datang daripada ni lah, revenues. But the first outflows adalah from the cost of goods sold, the cost to produce the goods or services. Okay, ataupun sometimes they use the terms cost of sales. Okay, so this is our first level of expenses ataupun our cost. Okay, so when we take revenues, tolak dengan cost of goods sold, kita akan dapat our very first level of profit, which is called the gross profit. Okay, the gross profit. So to illustrate that, just to make it clear, contohnya lah, I am selling this calculator. So I punya kedai jual calculator sahaja, right? And let's say this calculator I sell it for 100 ringgit. Okay, murah lah kalau 100 ringgit, sepatutnya double lagi harga ni. Tapi for the sake of illustration, let's say calculator ni harga dia 100 ringgit. Okay, so 100 ringgit I will record under my revenue ataupun under my sales. Okay, tu 100 ringgit untuk satu unit lah. Tapi imagine I jual 1000 unit. So I take 100 ringgit multiply with 1000 units. Okay, tapi for illustration, just imagine based on 1 unit. Okay, so 100 ringgit I will record under my sales. Right, so for my cost of goods sold adalah cost untuk I acquire calculator ni. Since I'm not producing it, I bukan kilang yang produce calculator, tapi I beli ni from the distributor. Okay, ni Casio kan, Casio FC200V. There's only one sole distributor kat dalam Malaysia ni. Okay, and dia jual to all the retailers. Macam I, one of the retailers, I beli harga dia RM30. Okay, I jual RM100, but the cost for me to acquire this is RM30 per unit. So kalau sini 100, so cost of goods sold ni katakanlah RM30. So my gross profit would be equals to RM70. Okay, So adakah RM70 tu my final profit? No, that's my first level of profit, which is we call as a gross profit. Kenapa bukan final? Because we have other expenses that we have to pay. Okay, so the next level of expenses adalah operating expenses. Okay, kat sini you can see operating expenses termasuklah marketing, you boleh masuk kat sini salary of the employees, the admin costs, the utilities. Okay, again kalau you ada rental, masuk kat dalam ni. Okay, anything that you need to pay to run your business for your day-to-day operations. Okay, you kena bayar gaji pekerja, kalau tak macam mana nak jual produk you. Okay, you have to promote the products, so you have to pay for some marketing. Okay, so you need to have an office, so kena bayar rental. And dalam office tu you kena pasang all the computers, the aircons, the lighting, so semua kena bayar electricity. You have to pay internet. So all of those masuk dalam operating expenses. And these operating expenses selalunya will be huge jugalah. Sometimes beyond the cost of to acquire the goods. Okay, katakanlah bila you per unit kan dia. Okay, kalau tadi RM30, so let's say another RM30 kat sini. Bila you per unit kan dia lah. Okay, RM30. Contoh lah. So from 100 tolak 30 tinggal 70, and then ditolak lagi 30, tinggal lah RM40. Dan RM40 kita panggil sebagai operating profit. So operating profit tinggal RM40 sahaja. Okay, contoh lah. So you left with RM40 per unit. So next we have to pay interest. Okay, interest. So interest ataupun financing cost ataupun finance cost. So this applicable if you use financing ataupun you borrow some funds. So when you borrow some funds, you have to pay financing costs. Okay, and why we deduct financing costs at the first place? Because financing cost is tax deductible. Okay, so we don't have to pay tax for the financing cost. So kalau kita nak calculate our tax expenses, kita kena remove interest from our operating profit. Okay, so when we remove operating profit, again kita minus lagi. Tadi kita dah minus operating expenses to get operating profit. Now we minus interest. Okay, minus interest. Then we're gonna get profit before tax. Okay, after operating profit, we minus interest. We're gonna get profit before tax. So katakanlah our interest per unit adalah RM5. Contohlah RM5. So you're left with RM35 here. Okay, after you tolak the financing cost, you're left with RM35. Okay, so this RM35 you have to pay your tax. And let's say your tax adalah based on 24%. Okay, 34%. Sorry, 24%. So 35 darab 24%, you kena bayar tax expenses you RM8.40 per unit. So tolak dengan the cost 35, so your net income akan jadi RM26.60. Okay, for your net income. So ni untung bersih you. So daripada RM100 harga yang you jual, okay, and tolak all the relevant expenses, so you left with RM26.60 profit, net profit untuk satu unit. Again, kalau you jual 1000 unit, you darablah 1000. Kalau you jual 10,000 unit, you darablah 10,000. Okay, and this net profit are subject to distributed to the shareholders. Remember tadi? Baik, panjang sangat. Okay, I tulis balik ah. When you have net profit, you akan distribute to the shareholders in the form of dividend, tapi balance akan masuk dalam retained earning. Okay, so that's how the structure of your income statement looks like. Start dengan revenues on top, tolak cost of goods sold, dapat gross profit, dan tolak operating expenses, and then you get the operating income ataupun nama lain dia, earning before interest and taxes. Okay, and we minus the interest to become earning before taxes, ataupun tadi I use the word profit before taxes kan, pun boleh juga. And then we minus the tax, katakanlah the tax tadi 34%, then get the net income ataupun net profit, ataupun sometimes we might use the terms earnings after tax, ataupun in short EAT. Okay, semua terms ni representing the same thing, net income, net profit, earning after tax, after deducting the tax rate. And from the net income, remember tadi dia pecah kepada dua lah. Dia bayar dividend and the balance akan masuk dalam return. Okay, so that's our income statement. Okay, and this is how the income statements of the same company looks like. Still ada groups and bank, still ada 2 tahun, still ada notes that you can refer to if you want to look into details, what are the items. So they start dengan revenue, and then they list down all the incomes that they have, and then there are the expenses. Cuma expenses ni dia hanya pecahkan kepada, these two are the operating expenses, personnel dengan other overheads and expenditure. So this is the interest, the finance cost. And company ni at the end, these are the tax rate, and at the end dia rugi. Okay, company ni suffer losses. Okay, so that's for income statement. Okay, so the first two statements is just the overview and also the format together with the items. But the most importantly, kejap lagi for the next final 1 hour ni, kita akan tengok how to prepare the cash flow statement. Okay, but before we go through how to prepare the cash flow statement, let's take a short break. Okay, kita rehat kejap before we proceed dengan the cash flow statement. Okay, the final 1 hour. Okay, I'm not sure whether how many classes you have today, but likewise, I think I have my class full for the day, so this is my final 1 hour. So let's continue with the second part of topic number 2. Okay, the cash flow statement. Okay, so for cash flow statement, we try to summarize again the inflows and outflows, but now, as I already mentioned in the earlier section, when we talk about cash flow, the name pun cash flow, and so we are concerned about how the cash move from one balance sheet to another together with the income statement for that particular year. And then we're going to try to reconcile all the cash transaction. But again, when we do reconciliation and when we try to summarize, we're going to make some assumptions. Okay, we're going to make some assumptions that the movement tu memang melibatkan cash. Okay, and this cash can move atau can change due to the difference between the balance sheet items. Okay, remember dalam balance sheet ada 3 tadi kan, asset, liabilities and equity. And we're gonna trace the movement, the changes, and every changes tu kita akan letak dia ataupun we're gonna classify them as either the movement to increase ataupun decrease, ataupun we're gonna see whether dia akan affect from the cash either inflows ataupun outflows, right? And the inflows and outflows ni selalunya kita letak ada label plus and minus lah. So plus tu duit masuk, outflows tu the cash keluar. Okay, and at the end of the day, when we do the reconciliation, the value of the cash in the cash flow statement must be equal ataupun tally ataupun synchronize, that's what I'm saying, sync dengan the cash in the balance sheet. Okay, so in order to determine whether our calculation for cash flow statement tu betul ataupun tidak, we're going to see lah the value tu equals ataupun tidak. Okay, so in terms of the categories, we have 3. Okay, dalam cash flow nanti kita akan nampak the first category is called operating activities. Okay, dalam income statement tadi pun you can see the operating activities. So here the operating activities includes the net income. Okay, so again in net income kita boleh nampak dalam income statement. Okay, and then we're going to look at depreciation. Okay, ada salah hijau kat sini. Depreciation. So for depreciation pun we can get it from the income statement, right? And then the rest of items under operating activities comes from the changes. So the keyword kat sini adalah the changes of current asset and current liabilities. So if we split ataupun we look back dekat dalam balance sheet, kan kita ada current asset kat sini, and then we have current liabilities. And here we have fixed asset, and then we have here long-term liabilities, and also equity kan. Okay, so this is the balance sheet. So when we track the changes of balance sheet for the current asset dengan current liabilities ni, kita akan letak dia dalam operating activities, kecuali with the exception of cash. So cash ada dalam current assets, tak masuk dalam operating activities. Short-term investment. So short-term investment ni apa? This is our marketable securities. Okay, this one also will not be part of our operating activities. And the third one adalah notes payable. Notes payable ni ada dalam current liabilities, pun tak masuk operating. So marketable securities ni ada dalam current asset, and notes payable ni ada dalam current liabilities. So these two, instead of in operating activities, dia ada dalam financing. So kita akan move this short term and also notes payable masuk dekat sini, masuk dalam financing activities together with notes payable. Okay, so the ones I put star, kita sini masuk dekat number one, which is our operating activities. Okay, so for number 2, kita ada investing activities. The ones that we're going to look at just on the fixed asset. Changes, still changes, perkataan changes ni kat sini. On the fixed asset. So fixed asset yang kat sini, this is based for number 2. Here, for investing activities. And the final category is financing activities. The first 2 exclusion from the operating akan masuk dekat sini. Okay, yang I underline dekat number 1 ni, short term dengan notes payable akan masuk dekat sini. Together with equity and also long term debt. So equity ni, yang ni, this is number 3. This is also number 3. Okay, so from balance sheet, you can see semua items akan kita masukkan ke dalam each and every single category kat sini. And for income statement, okay, ada banyak item sebenarnya dalam income statement, tapi we just need 3 things. Number 1, net income. Yang ni, net income dari income statement. Number 2, depreciation. So depreciation yang kat sini, the second item. And the third one would be dividend. So dividend yang ni. Okay, so untuk income statement, we need to find 3 things sahaja. Okay, but for balance sheets, almost every items you're going to transfer into our respective activities. So once kita dah classify the activities and know where to transfer, okay, I'm going to skip this one first. Kita akan transfer dalam bentuk macam ni. So this is our format. Okay, we're going to start with the name of the company on top, the name of the statement, cash flow statement for the year X and X, right? And we have the 3 categories. Category yang pertama, the second one, and the third one. Okay, and remember, for operating, we're going to start with net income, and this net income datang dari income statement. Plus depreciation pun datang daripada income statement. This part net income dengan depreciation daripada income statement. This part and this part. Okay, so the rest comes from the changes in current asset and current liabilities. Again, with the exception of 3 I mentioned, cash, notes payable dengan short-term investment. Okay, so notes payable dengan short-term investment masuk dekat financing yang ni. This one, short-term and also notes payable. Okay, so second category, investing, hanya fixed assets. And for financing, on top of the short-term investment dengan notes payable, we're going to include the equity and also the long-term liabilities. Okay, kategori yang ni tadi lah, long-term liabilities dengan equity. Okay, boleh ya? So that's in terms of how we put information from the balance sheet, income statement as our source of information, and then kita masukkan dalam kita punya statement. But okay, takkan kita letak numbers kat sini, macam mana kita nak kira? Adakah kita campur je semua? No. There are some items that we're going to add, and there are some items we have to minus. Okay, so in terms of how to determine whether we add or we minus, we're going to look at these rules for classification. Okay, rules for classification. So this is super important lah, I can say. Sebab nak classify ni, you kena faham whether the transaction tu menunjukkan cash tu masuk, meningkat as a sources, ataupun cash tu berkurangan whereby we use the cash. Okay, so the terms sources and users ni representing the transaction, whether we use the fund, maknanya this is outflow, cash outflow, or this one gonna be our inflows, duit masuk. Okay, now to make it easier, I'm gonna split the section ni, saya ingat lah, into 2 parts. Okay, let's try again. Okay, at least tak langgar line tu. Okay, so kita tengok yang bawah dulu, the easier ones. Okay, remember the items for income statement ada dekat bawah ni. Okay, so we have net profit, kita ada depreciation, kita ada dividend, and on top of that, we might suffer losses. So untuk profit ataupun loss ni, selalunya salah satulah. Bisa ada company to profit or loss. Okay, but the other two memang consistent, kita kena cari depreciation and also dividend. Okay, so if you go back to here, I letak kat sini net income. So income can be positive, it can be negative. It can be profit or it can be loss. Okay, so how we treat the items. So kalau company to generate profit, okay, profit specifically profit after tax, net profit dia, we're gonna treat that as our source of cash. Maknanya bila profit dapat untung kan, untung tu kita assume that will be our cash source. So if it's source, kita akan letak action dia sebagai we gonna add, kita akan tambah. Okay, ataupun I letak simbol plus je lah, kita plus. Okay, bila profit kita dapat cash, so the amount of profit tu kita akan letak simbol plus, simbol tambah. Okay, but if the company suffer losses, so the amount, the values yang generated from the loss in terms of the action, we're gonna put a minus. Okay, so the users ni, anytime kita label as use, kita akan minus ataupun kita letak di dalam bracket je lah. Put in the bracket. Okay, so the bracket ni indicates minus lah. Okay, so when we talk about net income, it can be positive, it can be negative. Straight away, kalau positive to net profit. If it's negative, it is a net loss. Okay, so this one is very straightforward lah, tak ada masalah. Next, we move on to the second item, which is depreciation. Okay, so depreciation, remember tadi, depreciation ni kita akan letak di dalam operating activities. Okay, and from the statement pun, we nampak depreciation tu berada dalam operating activities. And you notice that dia punya symbol, dia letak kat sini plus. And this is because depreciation, we always akan letak dia action as plus ataupun we add. Okay, so this is fixed. Depreciation always plus. Okay, regardless whatever the amount tu kita akan masukkan dia dalam operating expenses and we're going to plus with the net profit ataupun from the net loss, we're going to plus the depreciation. Okay, so ni straightforward lah. You tak payah tengok apa-apa. You just tengok depreciation, okay, kita tambah dekat operating expenses ataupun operating activities. And the last item from income statement adalah dividends. And dividends akan ada dalam financing. Yang ni dividend activities akan ada dalam financing activity, dividend payment. And this dividend payment will always be minus. Sebab dia masuk dalam kategori use. So dividend ni kita kena bayar. We have to pay dividend to the shareholders, so we're going to use the dividend, so therefore we're going to minus our cash account. And kita akan tolak lah, so dividend kat dalam ni sepatutnya kita akan letak dia dalam bracket. We're going to minus the item. Okay, so untuk income statement, since we only have 3 items, so this is how we treat the classification. Okay, so whatever the amount, dia akan correspond dengan the action, whether we add or we minus. Now, the most important part yang mungkin tricky a bit is about the changes. Perasan ada perkataan changes dekat operating, changes dekat investing, and we also have changes dekat dalam financing. And dia applies to the balance sheet items. Okay, to the current asset, to the current liabilities, to the fixed assets, and also for the long-term liabilities on the debt dengan the equity. Okay, semua ada perkataan changes ni. So what does it mean by changes? Okay, changes ni represent the movement of values from one year to another year. Okay, so to take an example, okay, kejap I clearkan sikit kawasan ni. Okay lah. So this one tadi users action dia minus letak kat sini minus. So for example, I'm gonna take 2024 contohnya versus 2023. Okay, so ingat bila kita buat cash flow statement, there'll be at least 2 years punya information. Dia akan bagi sama macam dalam annual report tadi. Okay, and let's say kita nak tengok the first item, which is the asset. Okay, asset. So when we do classification, how we treat assets and liabilities and equity will be different. Okay, cara kita nak classify will be different. So first we look at the asset. So ingat tadi dalam balance sheet kita ada asset kat sini, liabilities and equity. So the way we treat asset and we treat liability and equity slightly different. Okay, bukan slightly different, memang totally different. In fact, it's total opposite. So for example, okay, kita tengok asset. Okay, dalam asset kita tengok current, we have let's say inventory. Okay, we have inventory. So when, for example, in 2023, inventory kita ada nilai dia RM70,000, for example. And after a year from 2023, they go to 2024, the value now reduced to just 50,000. Okay, kalau you baca from 2023 to 2024, you nampak lah kan, daripada 70 sekarang reduced to 50,000. So if you want to take the changes, katakanlah X1 minus X0. So X1 tu adalah, this is X1. So this is X0. Okay, X1 tu menunjukkan tahun terkini, and X0 tu adalah the previous year. Okay, the previous year. So when we do changes, okay, sebab kataan dia nak buat changes ni kan. So when we do changes, we always compare the current year versus the previous year. So 50,000 minus 70,000, you get a negative ataupun a decrease of 20,000. Okay, decrease of 20,000. Okay, saya letak kat sini action kejap. So when a decrease in asset, sebab ni asset inventory adalah asset, so dia decrease in asset, so kita akan letak dia sebagai source. So when it's a source, we gonna add. So action dia adalah kita tambah, kita add. Kita tambah kepada cash account kita. So how to explain this in the layman's term? So layman as possible. So just imagine inventories tahun 2023 kita ada 70,000 worth of inventories. Okay, 70,000 worth of inventories, maknanya inventories ni belum jual. It is in our warehouse. Okay, and next year 2024, this inventories dah shrink ataupun dah kurang value dia by the value of 20,000. So that's why kita letak sini negative atau reduce of 20,000. So this 20,000 kita bukan assume dia hilang, bukan 20,000 ni hilang. Kita akan assume this 20,000 is already sold, dah dijual. So that's why kita punya value of inventory dah berkurangan from 70 to 50,000. So reduced by 20,000. So this 20,000 like I said, bukan value dia hilang. Okay, mungkin possible dalam real life mungkin hilang ataupun mungkin rosak. Tapi in accounting, we're going to assume this 20,000 telah pun dijual, and that sales dah di-convert into cash. So that's why this 20,000 kita letak ditambah, because we're going to add this 20,000 in our cash account, in our cash transaction. So that's why whenever there's a decrease in asset, we're going to add to a cash account, sebab Asset ni bila kita reduce, selalunya kita assume kita jual. We liquidate, we sell, and then the sales amount masuk dalam cash. Okay, but for users, kalau increase ni pula, katakanlah kita ambil satu lagi jenis aset, let's say the fixed asset. Okay, and in 2023 the fixed asset value dia 400,000, contohnya lah 400,000. And in 2024 the value of fixed asset has increased to 500,000. Okay, for example. Okay, so daripada 2023 400, and in 2024 they increase to 500,000. So mathematically kita ambil lah x1 minus x0, 500 minus 400, we're gonna get 100,000. So ada increase of 100,000 sebab value dia positif kan, so they increase by 100,000. So bila they increase in asset by 100,000, so this indicates that kita gunakan fund kita untuk membeli aset yang baru. Okay, sepatutnya 2023 ada 400,000, tapi 2024 aset ni dah increase, so therefore we invest, we put out our money 100,000 ringgit, and we put it as a minus sign, sebab itu menunjukkan kita guna kita punya cash to make investment. Okay, yeah, so that's how we classify the treatment for the assets. Okay, so and dari segi relationshipnya, you can see bila dia changes ni, dia opposite of the action. Maksudnya bila dia negatif dekat sini kita tambah, tapi bila dia positif kita tolak pula. Okay, so dia terbalik when we talk about assets. Okay, but for liabilities and equity, okay, untuk liability dengan equity, how we treat, kita akan treat dia corresponding dengan the changes. Contoh, okay, for liability, kita ambil satu liability, accounts payable. Okay, AP ni accounts payable. Accounts payable ada dalam current liabilities. Okay, imagine again, kita punya value kat sini katakanlah 40,000. Okay, 40,000, and then dia increase, so naik ke 50,000. Okay, 2023 40,000, but in 2024 they increase to 50,000. So 50 minus 40, dia ada increase of 10,000 ringgit. So bila account payable naik 10,000 ringgit, so we're going to put a plus sign kat sini. So they correspond, sini positif, sini positif. Tapi kalau tadi untuk asset, bila dia negatif in changes, kita oppositekan dia dengan plus. But why? Kenapa? So again, if you want to visualize and you want to truly understand, kalau asset tadi kenapa dia decrease, dia tambah kita punya source of cash. So untuk liability pun sama, bila kita tambah kita punya liability, kita tambah kita punya hutang. Contohnya kat sini lah, AP ni account payable, kita hutang. So bila value dia bertambah by 10,000, we assume that the additional 10,000 tu adalah hutang yang sepatutnya kita bayar. Cash tu patutnya kita bayar hutang, tapi kita tak bayar. But we put it in our cash account, the 10,000. So that's why our cash account increase. Because instead of we pay our debts, the amount of cash tu we keep in our cash account. So that's why we plus when the liability increase. Kalau tak ada perubahan, then there's no change lah kan, not applicable. Tapi kalau dia bertambah liability or even equity, it shows that we raise fund. Kita tambah kita punya fund, kita punya cash. Okay, but similarly, let's say lah kalau satu lagi liability, kita ada notes payable. Okay, hutang dengan bank. Okay, katakanlah 2023 hutang dengan bank kita 100,000. But in 2024, our notes payable decrease to 60,000. Contohnya 60,000. Okay, so bila 60 minus 100,000, we get a reduction of 40,000. So this reduction of 40,000 indicates that tahun 2023 kita ada 100,000 hutang. Okay, worth of debt 100,000 dengan bank. But in 2024, it's reduced to 60,000. So reduction of 40,000. So mana 40,000 ni hilang? We're going to assume that the company make payment 40,000 to the bank, and therefore the loans have been reduced by 40,000. So bila kita bayar 40,000, so what happened to our cash? Our cash akan reduce. Kita tolak lah, kita guna cash untuk bayar hutang. So that's why for liability and equity, the amount of sources and users tu dia akan correspond dengan the action. So naik liability, kita akan tambah. Bila kurang liability, kita akan minus. And when you understand this, then we can classify every transactions together dengan dia punya classification yang ni, dengan categories into this statement. Okay, I give you berapa? Kita supposed to stop at 6:15 ni. Okay, so I have about half an hour lagi. Okay, I give you some breather time untuk digest apa benda yang cerita tadi before kita tengok at the actual example. Okay, so how this classification and how the categories, okay, the items that we have from the sources yang datang dalam bentuk the balance sheet and also the income statement. Okay, so these two will be our source of document, source of data ataupun raw material untuk kita punya cash flow statement. Okay, so seperti biasa, as I mentioned, when we want to do cash flow statement, we need to have at least one set of balance sheet. Okay, 2 tahun macam ni, with the complete information, with the total assets, total liabilities and equity, with the correct values lah. Syarat dia the figures mesti betul. Okay, and then we need to have at least the current year punya income statement. So walaupun dia bagi 2 tahun ni, the one that concern us is just the current year. Okay, so the non-current ni sebenarnya kita tak pakai pun. We just need the current year sahaja. Okay. So how now we have this source of information to use this classification and these categories and transfer into this. That's our task sebenarnya. That's how we want to transform the balance sheet, all the items, all the changes into this statement of cash flow. So to illustrate, first things first, kita dapatkan kita punya balance sheet ni. Selalunya kalau dalam soalan you dapat, you can jot down dalam kertas soalan tu. You do like what I did here untuk example ni. Okay, this would be your template, this would be your working. Okay, cara jalan kerjanya, you're going to start with writing down the changes. So X1 tolak X0. So you're going to start with that. And I truly recommend if you label mana satu X1, mana satu X0. Remember, X1 tu adalah the current year. This would be your X1. And 2003 would be your X0. Okay, sebab ada some question mungkin position dia terbalik from this. Dia letak X0 dekat sini, X1 dekat sini. So it's not necessarily you akan ambil the left one minus the right one. Tak semestinya. So to be on the safe side, label mana satu yang recent, X1 is the current one, the latest one, X0 is the previous year. So 2004 sebelum ataupun 2003 sebelum 2004. Okay, so X1 and then X0. And then we find the difference. Okay, so find the difference, simply ambil X1 minus X0 lah. So for example, for cash, walaupun kita tak perlu kalau ikut ni tadi, cash tak perlu masuk dalam operating activities kan. Tapi cash ni akan ada dekat summary. So I will suggest you to minus juga the cash. So 10,000 minus 15,000, you're gonna get a negative 5,000. Okay, negative 5,000. So this negative 5,000, ingat at the end of the working ni, kita akan masuk kat dalam ni. Okay, kita akan masuk semua items kat dalam ni. So technically, walaupun kita baru buat one line ni, cash, these three information kita boleh letak dekat summary dah. It will be part of our summary. Okay, so the negative 5,000 ni is actually our net change in cash. Okay, cash at the beginning of the year. So cash pada awal tahun adalah 2003, which is 15,000. So this would be our 15,000. Cash beginning adalah cash awal lah, the earlier, X0. And then bila kita tolak negative 5,000 plus 15,000, we're going to get 10,000 here. So the 10,000 is here. Okay. So adakah you akan dapat markah penuh bila you punya summary adalah sama macam yang ini? Not necessarily. Okay. Your full mark will be given based on the items yang ada dekat atas ni. Okay. But it is like a jawapan bocor, whereby you know bila you add all the section kat sini must be equals to negative 5,000. So technically, bila you kira jawapan you tak sama dengan negative 5,000, meaning there's something wrong dengan your calculation somewhere. You kena double check. Okay, so that's the first part lah. Then move on lah dengan line yang lain. So for example, marketable securities, 0 minus 65,000, you're going to get negative 65,000. And don't forget to add action kat sini. Okay, to add action. So to remember, kalau nak ingat saja, nak hafal tanpa perlu nak faham, untuk assets, bila dia negatif, kita tahu kat sini dia positif, dia terbalik. Okay, bila assets, dia akan inverse dia punya action. So bila changes is negatif, kita tambah. Account receivable 375 and 315, tolak 315, you're gonna get 60,000 kan. 60,000. So 60,000 positive, minus. Okay, senang je. Inventory 615 minus 415 is a 200,000 positive. So we're gonna minus. Okay, here kita masuk summary. Marketable securities, kita akan masuk financing activities. Account receivable, we masuk dalam operating. Inventories masuk operating. Okay, so macam mana nak tahu yang ni? Here, I dah mention pasal categories tadi kan. And I dah letak label-label juga kat sini. With the some exception, ni masuk dekat financing kan. Kat sini. Okay, so you kena recall lah and remember kat mana nak masukkan. Okay, and then we have net fixed asset. Net fixed asset, ini akan masuk dalam investing activity. Cuma untuk fixed asset, kat sini ada tulis tadi. Okay, maybe tak tulis, but for fixed asset, okay, for fixed asset, the ones that we want to include adalah the net fixed asset plus the depreciation. Okay, when we combine this, you're going to get gross fixed asset. Okay, since soalan ni use net fixed asset, the difference between the two, different 1 million minus 870 is 130,000 kan. Okay, and again, bila dia plus, kita akan minus. So we need to add the depreciation. Kita kena tambah depreciation in order to get the full value of net fixed asset. Ataupun selalunya kita panggil dia net capital expenditure, net capex. Okay, net capital expenditure ni adalah net fixed asset campur dengan depreciation. Or if we have gross fixed asset, kita just ambil gross fixed asset, the changes. Okay, since soalan ni guna net, so kita kena tambah dengan depreciation lah. So depreciation tu dekat income statement. So I'm going to put, I'm just going to leave it for now lah. Okay, kejap lagi kita tengok. Right? And then we move to account payable. Account payable ni pun dalam operating. So 60 minus 30 is 30,000. Okay, 30,000. But this is liabilities and equity. So liabilities and equity, the action correspond dengan value. So kalau ni positif, ni positif. Okay, so 110 minus 60 is 50,000. So this positive sign, kita pun plus dekat situ. Accrued expenses, 140 minus 130 is 10,000. Positif kat sini, kita plus juga. Okay, so yang total ni kita jangan kira lah. Total ni tak payahlah masuk. All the total, so the subtotal pun jangan masuk. Okay, so notes payable masuk financing. Accrued expenses masuk operating. Okay, and then the long term debt akan masuk financing. So 754 minus 580, it's going to be 174,000. Okay, 174,000 pun positive sign. We're going to add for the common stock. 170 dengan 170, there's no changes. So kita tak perlu masukkan lah. Not applicable. Okay, so for returning, technically we don't need to include this. Okay, but just for the sake untuk tunjuk you, 766 minus 710, so you get 56,000 kat sini. Okay, and this also not applicable lah. Okay, technically returning tak perlu masuk, tapi I just nak tunjuk you the difference is 56,000. Okay, the difference is 56,000. So now the plus and minus ni kita akan transfer dalam kita punya cash flow statement. But is that all? No, sebab kita ada satu lagi statement which is the income statement. Right? So for income statement, there's only 3. Ingat tadi I tulis kat sini. Income statement kita hanya ada 3 item saja yang kita nak. The net income, the depreciation and also the dividend. Okay, so adakah kita perlu buat changes macam ni? No, we just take the current one. So kita nak net income, number 1, this value. Number 2 is depreciation, this value. And number 3 is dividend, this value. Itu sahaja. We don't have to calculate. Okay. Kita tak perlu calculate dengan syarat 3 item ni we can see lah. Net income for sure we can see from here. Depreciation is either here, it can be here. So kalau tak ada dalam depreciation kat sini, it can be here. So ingat tadi the concept of depreciation, dia applicable dengan the fixed asset. So kalau dia bagi fixed asset, kita kena add dengan depreciation. Depreciation tadi berapa? 100,000 kan? Okay, depreciation 100,000, so we add with 100,000, so it becomes 230,000. So this 230,000 akan kita minuskan dalam investing asset. Okay, and untuk dividend, again dia bagi kat sini. But what happen kalau dividend tidak diberi? Okay, remember these 3 items, the 3 item correspond. Ada dah share dengan you banyak kali, dividend kita dividend pula dah. The profit. Okay, the net income ni, we might pay dividends to the shareholders kat sini. And then the balance akan bayar kat retained earnings. Okay, so in order to get net income, kita boleh add these two. Okay, kalau nak dapat salah satu ni, kita kena minus, kan? So, the formula, net income minus dividend, dapat retaining. Sama juga kalau kita nak cari dividend. Okay, so kita kena minus retained earning. So, therefore, in order to find dividend, kalau dividend is not given in the income statement, we need to get the net income. Okay, dapatkan net income. And then we minus with the retained earning. So retained earning ni, kalau dibagi macam ni, kita terus tolak lah 56,000. Okay, 117 minus 56 dapatlah 61,480. But sometimes retain earning ni pun tak ada dalam income statement. Dia tak letak. Dia hanya stop sampai net income je. So how to find the dividend? Kena tengok retain earning dekat balance sheet. Okay, but the balance sheet, the net income is accumulated. Okay, they accumulate setiap tahun. So to get the retain earning for the year, so kita kena find the difference. So the difference dia berapa? Ini tadilah 56,000. 766 minus 710, we get 56,000. And this 56,000 sama dengan retain earning untuk tahun 2004 kat sini. Okay, so kalau retain earning ni tak appear dekat sini, we need to find the difference between retain earning 1 minus retain earning 0. Okay, so technically kalau kita ambil information from the bottom here, net income dia 117,480, and then kita minus dengan 766 minus 710 is 56 kan, so minus 56,000, and then you're gonna get 61,480. Okay, which is this one lah, cuma dalam soalan ni dia dah bagi. Okay, kalau imagine the bottom two ni tak ada, okay, the bottom two information ni tak ada, dia just stop sampai net income, then yes, you have to find yourself lah the dividend. Okay, and kena cari dividend tu. Okay, so net income masuk operating, depreciation masuk operating, dividend akan masuk financing. And the treatment, operating ni plus, net income kita plus, financing ataupun dividend ni, dividend bukan operating ni, dividend, we minus. Okay, how I know all of this? Again, dekat sini tadi, profit kita plus, depreciation kita plus, dividend we minus. Yang dividend ni masuk dalam financing, net income depreciation dalam operating. Okay, dalam format ni lah. So now you have all of the information. Okay, semua information dalam balance sheet dah ada, dalam income statement pun dah ada, 3 items. So our task next is to transfer. Kita kena transfer. So ni solution based on the working macam I tulis tadi. Okay, cuma I tulis lagi banyak lah. I tulis for the cash pun I letak, for the retaining pun I letak. Tapi the ones that concern us, the ones yang I letak the action add and minus ni. Okay, plus minus ni. Itu je. Yang NA dengan yang ni pun, NA ni jangan masuk lah. Okay, just plus minus ni sahaja. Okay, and I on top of that I letak juga masuk dekat mana, which activities. Okay, sini pun letak which activities, the 3 items. Okay, so this is the final answer. Okay, so once you have the working tadi, imagine you belum start apa-apa, you're gonna start your operating activities with your net income. Okay, net income will be the first item. So net income dapat daripada mana? Daripada sini. Okay, 117,480 net income. Ataupun I label kat sini tadi kan, 117,480 operating expenses plus. Okay, 117,480 plus. Plus maksudnya tak ada sign apa-apa lah. I tak letak dalam bracket. Okay, and then we add with depreciation. Depreciation is 100,000. So depreciation 100,000 kat sini. So you plus kat sini. Okay, and then we move on dengan items from the balance sheet. So specifically kalau kita tengok kat sini lah. Untuk operating, kita start dengan account receivable. So account receivable, it's positive 60,000. Okay, positive 60,000, tapi action dia negative. Okay, 60,000 negative. Okay, so we're gonna put 60,000 negative for account receivable. Okay, for account receivable. Right. So next, lepas account receivable adalah inventories. So inventories pun dalam operating, the value is 200,000 and it's minus as well. So we're going to put 200,000 in bracket to show it minus. Okay, and then selepas tu operating yang seterusnya ada dekat liabilities, we have account payable. Under operating, account account payable is 30,000 plus, and also accrued expenses 10,000 plus. Okay, itu sahaja operating. Okay, so for operating seterusnya, account payable 30,000 plus, accruals 10,000 plus. Okay, so once you've done all of this, kita calculate satu persatu. So 117,480 plus 100,000 minus 60,000 minus 200,000 plus 30,000 plus 10,000. So setiap satu tu you kena kira lah. 117,480 plus 100,000 jadi 117,480, tapi lepas tu tolak 60,000 dan minus 100,000, and then you add back 30 and 10,000. So at the end, you're going to get a negative 2520 for your operating activities. Okay, negative 2520. Okay, so untuk operating ni, note again, untuk depreciation, you extract directly from income statement. Tapi kalau tak ada, you take the difference in the balance sheet. Okay, kena cari perbezaannya dalam balance sheet. Okay, untuk investing, so this is first category. Untuk second is the investing. Kita tengok the fixed asset. And the fixed asset, here I dah letak tadi, the changes adalah 130, but we have to add the depreciation. So therefore the value plus the depreciation adalah 230,000. Okay, 230,000. So 230,000 dia appear kat sini lah, 230,000 minus. Okay, so dia bagi juga note kat sini, if it based on net, you have to add depreciation. Tapi kalau dia based on gross, you just take the difference between the gross. Okay, so for investing, just one item, fixed assets. And finally, our third item adalah financing activities. We go back to our balance sheet. So kita tengok mana yang label sebagai financing. So marketable securities 65,000 plus. Okay, 65,000 plus. So 65,000 plus for short-term investment ataupun marketable securities. Okay, and then we go down here, notes payable, another financing 50,000 plus. Okay, 50,000 plus. So 50,000 pun plus kat sini. Okay, and we left with two long-term liabilities, long-term debt ni, long-term liabilities is 174,000 plus, and don't forget the dividend, always minus 61,480. Here 174 dengan 61,480. So sama juga approach dia. You take calculator, ambil 65,000 plus 50,000 plus 174,000 but minus 61,480. So you get a net operating activities of, bukan net, income operating, this is financing. Net financing activities of 227,520. Okay, 227,520. Okay, so what you need to do next is to check. You take negative 2,520 plus negative 230 ataupun 230,000 plus 227,520. So ni negatif plus negatif, maknanya negatif 2,520 minus 230,000, and then we add with 227,520. That amount should equals ataupun tally to this negative 5,000. And remember mana dapat negative 5,000 ni tadi? Dengan 50 dengan 10,000 is based on this, which is based just on the cash. Yang ni saja, based on this line je. Okay, so untuk summary ni tak sepatutnya salah lah. You boleh copy je daripada cash main transactions. Tetapi to determine whether your answer is correct or not, bila you add yang pertama plus yang kedua plus yang ketiga, should get negative 5,000. Okay, but if you get Anything else than negative 1,000, then you kena double check lah, double triple check kat mana yang salah you kira. Selalunya salah dekat mana? Dekat depreciation, dekat capex ni, lupa nak tambah balik. Bila dia net, you lupa nak add the depreciation. Sometimes you forgot to add the dividend, especially kalau dividend tu tak diberi. Ya, itu je lah selalunya source of error. Okay, double check dulu net capex ni, adakah dia gunakan net fixed asset ataupun gross. Kalau net, jangan lupa kena tambah dengan depreciation, sebab kalau tak tambah depreciation, dia short 100,000 kat sini. Okay, imagine you short 100,000 kat sini, so ini letak 130 sahaja. So therefore bila you add, tak cukup, value dia lari. Okay, or if dividends is not given, macam soalan ni dividend dia bagi, tapi ada soalan dia tak bagi dividend, so you left out dividend, so you short dekat sini pula. And then again your net change akan berubah. Okay, so that's how we do cash flow statements. Okay, cash flow statements. So sebenarnya I have one questions, walaupun dia dah habis topik ni. I can share with you one question. Okay, soalan ni is based on past year question. Okay, past year questions from October 2006. Okay, dah lama dah soalan ni, 12 tahun yang dulu. So similarly, they're going to give you two sets of balance sheets. Okay, and for this question, perasan dia punya position of X1 dengan X0 tu terbalik. So X1 dia dekat sini, X0 dia dekat depan. Okay, so bila you nak minus tu nanti, dia bukan 9,000 minus 7,282, tapi dia 7,282 minus 9,000. Okay, so be careful on that. And untuk soalan ni, they give you gross. Okay, dia bagi gross. And ada accumulated depreciation kat sini. Okay, maybe since kita ada about 5 minutes ni, kita boleh try lah At least kita try apa, buat the working. Okay, buat dia punya working so that you can try transfer information tu. So as I mentioned, untuk soalan ni, this is your X1, this is your X0. Okay, yang baru tu di kanan, the later one is at the back. So when you want to do your X1 minus X0, so make sure you ambil yang the 2005 minus 2004 yang ni. Instead of left to right, you are calculating from right to left. And we can put the action juga kat sini. So as always, start dengan cash walaupun nanti kita tak transfer. 7,282 minus 9,000, you get a negative 1,718. Okay, 1,718. Action there. There be no applicable lah, kita tak buat apa-apa. Okay, for marketable securities, so 20,000 minus 48,600 is gonna be 28,600. Okay, so from 2004 dia decrease to 20,000. So dia reduce. So remember, kalau nak cepat, kalau dia negatif dekat changes, automatically dia plus untuk asset. And this marketable securities masuk dekat mana? Masuk financing. Okay, so account receivable 632,160 minus 351,200. So ada increase of 280 960. Okay, 280,960 dia plus the increase, so therefore we minus. Okay, untuk asset macam tu jangan lupa. So account receivable dengan inventory ni both masuk operating. So 1287 360 minus 715 200. So you're gonna get 572 160. Okay, so ni increase, so automatically we minus. Okay, so total current asset tak perlu kira. So since dia bagi kita gross, we're gonna use this untuk kita punya investing. Okay, tak payah tengok yang net lah, kita ambil yang gross. Okay, so for the gross, it's 1202 950. Then we minus with 491. So we get for the gross fixed asset 711 950. Okay, 711 950. So the increase, we minus. Yes.
Mana Ben?
Ada nak tanya ke? You on the mic tu. Okay, so kalau ada soalan tu, we move on dengan depreciation. So depreciation, we take 263 160 minus with 146 200. So here we get the depreciation 116 960. Okay, 116 960. Okay, so sepatutnya kita akan letak dia depreciation plus lah. Remember, depreciation is always plus. So ni masuk dalam operating. Cuma ikutkan untuk soalan ni, depreciation dia bagi. Okay, and I just want to share how to pick the depreciation value depending whether we use income statement or we use the balance sheet. So kalau balance sheet, kita find the difference and then we're going to always put it as a positive ataupun plus. Okay, untuk accounts payable, this is operating, notes payable masuk financing, accruals masuk operating. So accounts payable, tak nampak 324 minus 145 600. So it will be 178 400. So dia positif, kita plus 720 to 200, dia ada increase by 520. So this is plus. So 284 960 minus 136,000. So we have 148 960. So this is another plus. Okay, so for long-term debt, 1 million minus 323 432. So there's another increase of 676 568. So this is another plus. Okay, and this long-term debt masuk financing activity. So there's no changes here, not applicable. Return earning, I kira jugalah 97 632 minus 203 768. So for the return earning, the changes adalah 106 136. Okay, negative 106 136. Okay, so for your balance sheet itu you dah label everything lah. Okay, and for the income statement, remember kita nak cari 3 benda je. Okay, so the first item is the net income. So dalam case ni dia losses. So ni masuk operating, but the value is negative. We have the depreciation kat sini, plus the operating is 116960, which is consistent dengan kita punya difference tadi, 116960. So the only missing items for this question adalah the dividend. So dividend kita kena guna formula. So formula dia, remember tadi, is net income dalam case ni is negative 95136 and minus the difference. So the difference was
Retained earnings.
106,136. Okay, 106,136. So minus with minus, we plus. So 95,136 plus 106,136, you're going to get a negative 11,000. Okay, and this is the amount of dividend. This dividend, you're going to transfer dalam financing activities. Okay, dalam financing activities. You're going to minus lah, financing. Okay, so I think you get all the information, the three items dalam income statement. Okay, plus and minus respectively. And for the balance sheet, you take all of this information. Okay, and get this information and transfer dalam your cash flow statement. Okay, so I'm going to leave this for you. And your task is to transfer all of this information masuk dalam cash flow statement. Okay, so I'm going to post the question. Soalan yang tadi yang tak bertulis ni, I'm going to give you dalam in future. Okay, dah bagi you the working. So what you need to do next is just transfer the information masuk dalam the cash flow, and then later we're going to compare whether the right thing or not. Okay, so kalau you tak dapat capture ni, I'm going to share with you the video later. Okay, and we can compare our answers later. Okay, so I think that's about it. Just right. Okay, what 2-3 minit ni. So thank you very much. So we're gonna meet in 2 weeks time and kita akan proceed dengan topik 3. Okay, untuk topik yang 2 ni tadi, especially for the cash flow statement, please revise. Please try the maju berhad tu tadi, because I might include cash flow statement tu masuk dalam the first test. Okay, so thank you very much. Inshallah, I'll see you guys in 2 weeks time on Saturday.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you
Okay, Prof.
Thank
you, sir.
very much.